Hey, this is Ihab. In this video, I am going to demo for you how we can extract line art from a traditional drawing with pencil or charcoal into the digital format in a way that maintains as much as possible the line art feeling and quality. So it depends on the kind of drawing that we are extracting the line art from. So in a case like this, it might be a bit difficult because there's a lot of rendering and sort of like fuzzy kind of illustration there. So I'm going to demonstrate on this, and on this one, which might be probably a better example because you can see here it has a lot of vivid strokes. I do have this, but it's similar to what I mentioned the first one, where there's a lot of rendering. So this could work out in an interesting way, especially that it has mixed medium. So it has the gel pen, and it has charcoal, it has pencil, but I do also have the line art from one of the work in progress that I was making. So I'm gonna start with this one, and the process is straightforward, and I'll show you exactly how I do it, and you can sort of revise it however you feel is kind of easier for you. So the process would be having the image imported into Photoshop, and then you go into the select menu, and then you go into color range selection. So here you pick the shade that represents as much of the strokes that you would like to maintain. Let's say, for instance, this is the average tone of what you want, and then you go here into the fuzziness and increase or decrease the fuzziness. So anything in white is going to be captured in that selection. You don't want to go too much because then it's going to select a whole lot of stuff, including the smudges and the dirt. So I'm going to go with something like maybe this. The next step would be also going to the select, but this time I'm gonna go to save selection. Line art. Kind of rhymes. So I do want to save the selection because even though I could have just simply created a new layer and then I just kind of apply the shades to it, but it's good to have a safe selection to kind of go with. Now I'm going to hit D on the keyboard, which is going to default to black and white. Now if I hit Control Backspace, it's going to fill the back color. But if I do hit the Alt and Backspace, then in this case it's going to fill in the foreground color. So Alt and Backspace, and then Control D to deselect. So it's a little too dark now. That's because it's having the strokes or the line art on top of the original. So I'm gonna hide the original, and then I'm gonna create a new layer. So here is an interesting thing to know about creating a new layer in Photoshop. Typically when you click on the new layer, it's gonna create it on top of the layer you're on, but in this case I need it to be created below this layer. So I click and hold Control and then add layer, and then add layer. So now I am going to hit Control D to deselect, make sure I have no selection, and then I can just fill in with Alt and Backspace, fill it in with white. So in such an example, for instance, why do I need this? Well, it sort of helps me on maybe if I want just the line art, if I want to kind of turn it into vector, or if I want to turn it into something that is like etching kind of style, or if I want to make it send it for a specific purpose for like Illustrator or Maya, or maybe to create paths out of it. So that would be in such an example like here. The other thing I can also do is you can always like just go to that new layer. I'm gonna call this line art. So if you go to the line art and then you hit Control L, you can just change the levels if you want. And the other thing you can do also is when you go select, load selection, so I am back to the selection now. I can create a new layer here, just starting from scratch. And then I can hit Alt Backspace, and then if I hit Alt Backspace again, it's gonna saturate that kind of effect. So that is also something you can work with. Another utilization of this, let's say I'm drawing this traditionally and I don't want to take risk. Let's say I am aiming for a quality like this, and I'm kind of like on the verge of like, should I be using the white pastel, or should I also use with or without the white gel, or only the white pastel, or such and such. So if you want to do a kind of a study of that visualization, this is something that helps you on doing that. Another thing I can do is import a texture. Control A, Control C, Control W to close, Control V, Control T, hit Alt, so it would go from the center, so I don't have to scale up and all this. And then I would push this down, you know, something like this. So again, this has prevented me from going through the hassle of cleaning all the smudges and stuff like that. And because the color range gives you great control over, you know, the threshold, it sort of makes it pretty convenient. You can also click right here. So instead of just clicking here, you can just kind of say, oh, just kind of maybe I'll try something closer to that range, or maybe something closer to include the nose, for instance, and things like that. And of course, one of the tricks you can always do is also, before you start with this process, you can go to the levels and change the levels however you want, in a way that makes your selection a bit more predictable. So that is also something to consider. Okay, let me test. I'm curious to see what kind of result I can get from this one. So select color range, and yeah, let's see, something like this maybe. Okay, let me experiment. Okay, here's a selection. I'm gonna create a new layer, and since I'm experimenting, I'm just gonna go ahead and apply a color. But before I do so, I just want to remind you that this is a selection. Therefore, if you go to the lasso tool, the shortcut is L on the keyboard. You can just simply hit Alt. You can see the minus on the cross, and that means that it's going to remove these. Let's say you didn't like the inclusion of that area, right? Just to keep it kind of as clean as possible. So now I have this selection. There are two things you can do. Either you can just go with some wacky color just for testing purposes and just fill that color, and then you can use blending modes later. So I'll do that. I'll create a new layer. The other thing you can do also, it's very important to experiment with this. You also go to the select, and then you go to modify. And then here you could go to expand, contract. It's very helpful. Let's say, for instance, it's way too thick. You can just contract it, or expand the opposite situation. You can also smooth that selection. So when you click on smooth, let's say I'm gonna smooth it, you know, 3 pixels. You can see the selection is now kind of different. So now if I fill it up with the Alt Backspace, let me just compare this with this. Also, I'm gonna go here and fill it up with white. So almost gives you that kind of carbon copy kind of effect, right? So you can see this is a pretty nice tool for stylization. Yeah, so let me just, out of curiosity, okay, so let me see what I can do with blending modes. I'll select the line art layer, go here and start switching. This is kind of interesting. Exclusion. So if I select now the layer and go hit Control U to change hue and saturation. Anyhow, so yeah, let me see what I can do with this one here. Select color range. Let me unlock the layer first. Select color range. Maybe around the beak. Let's see what you got. Gonna save the selection. Hawk line art. Control D to deselect. Import that paper texture. I can steal it from here actually. By the way, if you wanna go backwards with the tabs, instead of Control Tab, you can go Control Shift Tab. It goes backwards, which also applies pretty much to Internet Explorer if you use Internet Explorer, Google Chrome and things like that. So that's a pretty neat tool to learn. This looks horrendous, but hey, it does the demonstration. So select load selection, and I'm gonna remind you here that if you hit D on the keyboard, let's say I'm gonna change it to something gray bluish right away. So Alt and backspace. So I wanted to remind you that you can also, as soon as you apply the effect, similar to what I did on the line example, Alt backspace again, it will just intensify that effect. So I'll go ahead and apply a mask on that background. Just make it like those, and then I'm going to well, opposite maybe. Control D and then Control I to give like white border. Control I just to see the two different feelings. Yeah, I hate this background, it's terrible. Just erase it. So yeah, this is the line art. So I'm gonna create a new layer. Here's another test I can do. I can go to this background layer, BG, and I'm gonna hit G for gradient, and I'm gonna keep the gray yellow just for fun. I'm gonna go with this type of gradient. Yeah, so here's a style you can go with. You can maybe counter it from the other side a little bit. Yeah, maybe something like this. Almost looks like it's etched on metal. And you can always go to this one and say Control and then click on the thumbnail. Let me experiment here, select, and then you can go to modify and then expand, and then select, modify, and then maybe feather. Let's see how that is gonna look like on a new layer to be safe. And I'm gonna hit D on the keyboard so it defaults to black and white, both the X and Y color, or A and B color, or foreground and background color, depending on whatever software you're using. So now it looks like the hawk is having a dream. And I can simply just keep it the way it is and just go and reduce the opacity. And look at this kind of, what is it called? Butter paper? Calc? The parchment paper, yes. Parchment paper. So yeah, this is how you achieve the parchment paper. I'm happy to stop here because this is a pretty nice kind of utilization of this technique. I mean, considering where we have come from, like this versus that, right? And it does maintain the line art quality as much as you want it to be, right? Yeah. So this is a technique that I learned about 10 years ago. I've never been active on YouTube, so I never thought about making such demos. So if you found this video helpful, let me know. And yeah, have fun and go create your own styles.